Samson Pruitt has never and will never be guilty of fighting dogs in any court of law, anywhere, anytime. Hello. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Samson Pruitt. I am owner and co-founder of Slither Incorporated. I usually do these videos while I'm driving around, but I was just sitting here thinking about everything, and it's so cool and quiet outside that I thought I would just go ahead and do it now while I sit here. There is a story behind me, my past. It is not what everybody makes it out to be, although I am no angel. I have written about it in my bios, but I think that what happened with the bios is I added too much of the rest of the story of Samson's life to the bios. When I was 15 years old, one of my closest friends moved down from New York. He brought a pit bull with him. Now I'm 46, so this was 30 years ago. 30 years ago, there wasn't a pit bull available in 5 different columns on Craigslist or even in the local newspaper. It was very rare that you actually even saw one. So the dog that he brought with him was named Tank, and he was a 6-month-old dog. And I had a few different types of dogs already in my childhood. My parents gave me a Warlock Doberman as a young teenager. And I had always really enjoyed dogs. But I spent time with Tank, and actually Paul left him with me in his car for a couple of hours one afternoon, and I don't really remember the circumstances, but I think he was helping his mother do something, and it was really hot outside. And I noticed that Tank was really hot, and yeah, there was no air conditioning in the car. So I stopped at a fast food place, and I got a big cup of ice water, and I started drinking it, and I gave Tank some, and we kind of bonded. And I really, really thought that dog was an amazing dog. And on top of it, whether anybody ever wants to admit it or not, part of the reason why we like certain kinds of animals is the wow factor, the attention that we get from having those animals and being involved with those animals, especially men. I find it very hard to believe that if you're real with yourself, that you would never admit to owning an animal for your ego, for the cool factor, or for it being a dangerous animal. I fell in love with pit bulls right then and there. I didn't get one myself until later that year or following year. I actually moved to Florida and started working for Crutchfield's Reptile Enterprises. And I remember one of my weekends off, I was with my girlfriend, and we got a newspaper, and I was looking for a wolf hybrid or something along those lines. And I ended up running across an ad for pit bull puppies, show dogs. So I went to this lady's house, and she had a kennel, and she probably had 100 pit bulls out on chains with the blue barrels, which was the way of the time. And while I was there, I bought 2 or 3 puppies from her from different litters. If you haven't figured it out now, I don't do things small. I'm an empire builder. When I decide that I want to do something, I dive in full force, to my own fault a lot of the time. And I did that with pit bulls. There's no question. By the end of the first week or two, I was spending every waking moment that I had that I wasn't working at this lady's pit bull farm, and I had bought a bunch of animals that I didn't have anywhere to put them. So I took a litter of puppies. I bought a whole litter of puppies from her. When I say puppies, these were 3 or 4 month old pit bulls, and I took them home, and I was letting them live in my backyard and feeding them in my garage. And I didn't really know what I was doing. I really didn't know what I was doing. So I remember my first negative interaction with those animals was I dumped a half a bag of dog food on the floor and let this whole litter of pit bull puppies start feeding together. And these things went crazy and tried to kill each other. And I spent the next 30 minutes separating these puppies. They were puppies. They were not adult dogs, but they were fighting like crazy at each other. And I was freaked out, and I got bit, and I put them all in kennels and took them back out to this lady. And I was like, these dogs are crazy. And she said, are you stupid? Pit bulls come from fighting dogs. You don't house them together. You don't feed them together. You keep them separate. You understand what you're doing. You learn. So she took me under her wing, and I started keeping my dogs at her place. And she taught me the ins and outs of maintaining a large-scale pit bull operation. And I was hooked. These dogs were amazing. She had weight pull carts. She had confirmation shows that we went to every single weekend. My dogs that I was buying from her and keeping at her place were winning ribbons and were winning weight pull competitions. And it was just an awesome and amazing experience to be involved with these animals on that level. It's sad because she took me around the country and introduced me to a bunch of different people that were involved in dogs, and would tell me who was a dog fighter and who was a person who did the confirmation shows and the weight pull, because there was a fine line back then. And if you were involved in pit bulls on any level, your bloodlines came from dogs that were used for fighting. It's in the history. If you don't like it, then you should probably not have the breed, but that's where they came from. So to wrap up this part of the story, the lady who I had all of these animals at her place ended up stealing all of my dogs and disappearing. Like, I went out of town. I was living in Florida. I came back to North Carolina for a week for something. When I got back down there, she had literally picked up all of these animals and moved. And I found her. I tracked her down 10 years later in El Paso, Texas, or somewhere like that. And she had basically just sold off her whole yard and gotten out of the dogs. So I had that really negative experience with her as a person. And the people that are involved in pit bulls are way worse than the animals themselves. So there is some truth to what everybody likes to say now about it's the person's fault, not the animals. So it did not deter me from wanting to be involved with these animals. I had met some really good connections through her for people who had dogs, and I moved back to North Carolina, and lo and behold, one of the biggest dog guys in the industry was right in my backyard, and I didn't even realize it my whole life because he wasn't a public figure. I decided that I enjoyed doing this stuff with these dogs so much that I wanted to start breeding them and build my own kennel. So I bought dogs from different people, just like I did with the Retics. I mean, it's so similar. I built a collection of animals, and I started breeding, and I did weight pulls, and I did confirmation shows, and I did the best that I could do to make sure that the animals that I got sold to, got sold to people who were going to do the right things with the animals. And there it is. It's a long story that I'm drawing into a short story because I spent 15 years, maybe even 20 years of my life 100% devoted to a breed of animals that nobody really liked and nobody wanted to be a part of. In the early 90s, I had 50 or 60 dogs. Again, at the time, everybody kept them on chains with blue barrel dog houses. All of my dogs were healthy and maintained properly. None of my dogs had scars, aside from what would come from wild boar hunting when we went on trips to do wild boar hunting. But they weren't fighting. They weren't beat up. They weren't abused. They were all in really, really good condition. But the ASPCA started putting out these flyers or these descriptions of what a dog fighting operation looks like. And in the description, it says blue barrels for dog houses and chains, which is, it's ludicrous. I mean, now the state of North Carolina has no tether laws, but back then everybody kept their dogs. I've seen hunting dog collections where there were 500 or 600 hunting dogs, nothing to do with pit bulls, all on chains and barrels. If you watch these shows in Alaska with the sled dogs, they all live on chains. They're all tethered out outside. You don't have to like it. You don't like putting snakes in cages. Sometimes you don't agree with the size of the cage or whatever. I get it. If there was a dog that I felt like needed more space, I gave it more space. If there was a dog that I felt like needed more attention, I gave it more attention. I built a yard. The people who were in power in that area, who wanted to be reelected or something along those lines, decided to come and charge me. They charged me. They took all of the dogs. All of the charges for dog fighting were dropped. When they took my animals, I went back out there. And this is the 93. Yes, there were more than one. This is the 93. I'm going to explain all of it in detail. I had chickens in a pen, like a dog kennel, fenced in kennel. The chickens were my pets. We got eggs from them and ate the eggs and stuff. We were living on a farm, man, out in the country. Pit bull farm, but it was a farm nonetheless. When I went out there and saw the yard empty, none of my dogs that I had raised from puppies and their grandparents and their great grandparents, I was so distraught that I felt I was just not going to be there. I left. I packed my stuff, and before I left, somebody had let the chickens loose out of the pen. And I started running around trying to catch the chickens, and I couldn't catch the chickens. So the 1993 charges for dogfighting was 50 counts of dogfighting. The charges were thrown out. I pled out in an agreement to get my dogs back to animal abandonment and animal cruelty because the chickens were running around loose. I abandoned the chickens. And you know what? I feel bad about it. Those chickens were awesome. But chickens run around in the woods on farms like that all the time. There were chickens out there that came before I even moved in out there. And I was distraught, and I couldn't take the time to run around and catch all the chickens because I was so heartbroken over the dogs. There was no trial. There was a plea agreement. I accepted misdemeanor charges for animal abandonment and cruelty to animals. 2 counts for the chickens. Nothing for the dogs. The dogs were returned to me and the other people that owned them, and there was nothing else ever said about it. The probation was 1 year of not being allowed to own any animals in the state of North Carolina. Sorry, it's not everything it's cracked up to be and all of the stories that you guys hear. So, me being the stubborn, absolutely ridiculously stubborn person that I am, I got more dogs. And I built another yard, and I bred pit bulls, and I sold pit bulls, and I did weight training with weight pulls. I did confirmations, and I did hog hunting and wild boar hunting all over the eastern United States, southeastern United States, up until, I guess it was early 2000, 9/11. The day after 9/11, I was standing out in my yard, feeding and watering dogs, wearing my rubber boots and shorts, and a helicopter flew over, a news helicopter, and there was somebody literally hanging out the window with a camera, and I was like, uh-oh, this doesn't look good. And then here they came. There were probably 30 officers, 15 or 20 different sheriff's deputy cars, all of them with these suspicions, with arguments that I was fighting dogs, using the same circumstantial evidence that the other arrest was behind. The logistics of all of it was so similar that I just knew that it would have a similar outcome. I was arrested. I was charged with 100 and something, 80 something counts of dogfighting. Again, one count for each animal. I had probably 100 adult dogs. Sounds really excessive, and it is. It's a big collection of animals. But, I mean, for those of you who have 500 ball pythons or 20 or 10 retics or 100, how crazy is it, really? You can go to a farm that has 200 head of cattle and nobody thinks anything of it. So it was a large-scale operation. I had litters of puppies on the ground. I had litters of puppies and bitches in off-the-ground kennels. I was breeding some of the best genetics in the country, both show genetics, weight pull genetics, and hog hunting animals that were used for professional hog hunts. And I sold puppies. I sold adult dogs. I spent my entire life doing this. It was dirty, man. I had dog crap in my mouth every single day, but I loved it. I loved the animals. I loved what I was doing. It was the genetic combination thing that I ended up falling in love with even more so later with reticulated pythons. But with the dogs, it was very similar to this. There were pedigrees, there were the genetics. It was a trick, and it was an interesting thing to try and produce dogs that other people couldn't produce. And I was arrested. I went to jail. While I was in jail, they spent 3 days loading all of these animals. They sent them to 4 or 5 different animal shelters close by. It was on the national news. Pictures of me in a jumpsuit in the jail, my mug shots and all of that stuff. And I was so destroyed that I literally laid down in the floor of the jail and slept for 2 days while my family raised the money to bond me out. When I made bond, I immediately hired an attorney, the best in the area. I had the attorney contact the judge and the district attorney, and we immediately petitioned for the return of the animals. They refused to return the animals, and instead started accruing these hundreds of dollars a day worth of fees. And I had a really bad feeling this time. The last time that this happened, I kind of felt like they were on our side and they wanted to give us the animals back. This time it didn't feel like it. This time it felt like these animals, that like they wanted to kill them. And I don't mean the judge. There was a different climate. Pit bulls were being hated in our country, and the PETA people and all of those kind of people wanted to just do away with the breed. They were coming into shelters and being killed instead of adopted. There were no adoption policies. There were counties and states that were banning them altogether. And again, it was an election season, and this was big publicity. The state of North Carolina was pushing to have dog fighting be made a felony instead of a misdemeanor. At the time, it was still a misdemeanor if you were convicted of it, and they were trying to use my case as this big, huge reason for the felony. Again, none of my dogs had scars. None of my dogs were abused. There were no fights. There was nobody fighting anything. There was no fighting paraphernalia. I had treadmills for weight pulling training and for conformation training. And I had animals on chains and animals in kennels. This is all what the wording for a dog fighting operation, what the reason for them charging me for all of this. In the very first meeting between my attorney and the district attorney and the judge, they offered to dismiss all of the dogfighting charges. The very first meeting, they wanted to euthanize my dogs, and I said, absolutely not. I said, I will not, under any circumstances, allow you to kill my dogs. Never. It will not happen. I will not, under any circumstances, accept a plea agreement for dog fighting because I'm not fighting any dogs. I will not do it. Those are off the table. So we had 3 more meetings in the judge's chambers, and finally the judge looked at the DA and he said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to give Mr. Pruitt the ability to plead to 3 counts of animal cruelty. And I think that the circumstances to be behind the animal cruelty were that some of my puppies were born or had some type of a parasite. Well, all puppies are born with parasites. So if I hadn't had a chance to worm them yet because they were too young, then maybe this is what they were talking about. But some vet somewhere had said that the puppies had parasites, and that some of my reptiles, which I had some chondros, some green tree pythons, some imported, I had a crocodile monitor, I had a couple of other different things, some Nile crocodiles in my fish tank, little babies. But there were some animals, some of the reptiles had a little mite infestation that I hadn't had a chance to get pest strips to deal with yet. So I conceded to accepting misdemeanor convictions for cruelty to animals without any dogfighting convictions. I've never been convicted of dogfighting. There is no dogfighting conviction. I refuse to accept it because I've never been caught fighting dogs. I've never been caught being involved in any of those types of behaviors. Sorry, guys. Hate to take this and turn it into something so much less dramatic. The reason that I was willing to accept any type of a conviction whatsoever is because I was promised that the dogs would be returned to me. So the end result was Samson Pruitt accepts cruelty to animal convictions. The cruelty to animal convictions were actually worse misdemeanor convictions than dogfighting. Had I accepted the dogfighting, the penalties for that would have been less. I refused it because I refused to ever be called a dog fighter. I refused. And to this day, I refuse. Although everybody loves to put that label on me. Sorry, it just doesn't happen. It just doesn't stick, man. It's not me. The punishment was 85 days in jail, to be done on weekends, and 1 year unable to own a pit bull in the state of North Carolina. And I accepted it because they were going to give me my dogs back. I won. And he wants to make us feel sorry for him. You know what? I sacrificed. I could have gone to trial. I probably would have beat them. The attorney said that there was no possible way that they would get a conviction for dogfighting because they didn't have any evidence to prove dogfighting. But I ran the risk of losing the dogs if I were convicted of something else, and that the trial could take years. Meanwhile, we're talking about $1,000 to $1,200 a day that these people were adding up by having taken my animals from my care and putting them in the care of all of these other institutions. I didn't have any option but to accept it. I wanted my animals to live. 20 years of my life was devoted to those animals. I loved them like my children. I have a lot of regrets. Owning the dogs is not one of them. I enjoyed them. I did not get back into them on a large scale because I could not watch it happen again. As much as I loved them, I have a pet now. I'm stubborn, man. But I love her, and I love the breed, and I'm not ever going to not have them. And I don't have any reason to not be allowed to have them. When I turned myself in for my first weekend in jail, When I got out on Sunday, they had killed every single one of my dogs. They euthanized them against the judge's orders. I went to go pick up my dogs, and I was told that they had all been euthanized. And the lady told me with a little smirk on her face that she was really proud of herself. So I called my attorney. We had an emergency meeting with the judge. The judge said, Mr. Pruitt, I'm really, really sorry that this happened. I can't believe that they did it, and you should sue them. You should sue us. You should sue everybody. And you know what I did? I walked out of that courtroom and I never looked back. I just went on with my life. I did my weekends in jail. I did all of that, all of the stuff, the requirements. Okay, I'm trying to wrap it up. This has been probably more information than necessary, but I just wanted all of you to hear the truth. About a year ago, it was real popular to beat Samson Pruitt up on Facebook about being a dog fighter. And all of the guys who do that use these old newscasts that say that Samson Pruitt was charged and convicted of dog fighting. The thing that blows my mind is that everybody believes the news, because we all watch the news and it's all lies, all of it. It's all hype and lies, and newscasters will say anything in order to get more ratings and get more people to watch their news channels. I've been in the news a couple of times. I'm not proud of it. Every single time it was slander and hyperbole. I was going to pay the money to get my actual criminal history. Because if you go look at my actual criminal history, which is extensive for marijuana convictions, then you will see that there are two different circumstances that I just explained to you where there were cruelty to animals convictions. There is no dog fighting conviction. Samson Pruitt has never and will never be guilty of fighting dogs in any court of law, anywhere, anytime. It's just not who I am. I hope that this video for me is not about trying to make the haters love me. It's not about trying to convince the people who don't like me that they're wrong. This video is for those of you who have supported me over the years, because here's what happens, man. Instead of everybody understanding that what they say that I did, I didn't do, everybody backs me up by saying, it was 15 years ago. The guy did his time, let him go. And it's not good enough for me. I appreciate the sentiment, and I agree with you pretty much for anything, that if you've been to prison and you've done your time and you've changed and you don't do it anymore, then you should be forgiven. But I wasn't convicted of fighting dogs. I just wasn't. I didn't go to prison for fighting dogs. I was not banned for life from owning a pit bull. It was misdemeanor convictions of animal cruelty. And if you are involved in any type of an animal operation, anytime in your life, you run the risk of having someone call animal control and having them find a dirty enclosure or some type of a problem and getting the same type of thing to happen to you. I hope it doesn't. But everyone is susceptible. I can name 5 or 6 of the biggest guys in the industry right now that have all gone through it and that all have that kind of a record. And again, I'm not pointing fingers to make myself look better. I'm simply telling you how easy it is to fall into the trap of our understanding about the care of animals and the ASPCA or PETA's understanding about the care and treatment of the animals. So there it is, love me or hate me, I'm here. I love my animals, all of them. I'm going to continue to love my animals. I'm not going anywhere. One thing that you will absolutely learn about Samson Pruitt is he does not quit. I will not quit. Thank you for listening. For those of you who have supported and continue to support me, thank you for your support. I hope that this gives you the ability to not think of me as the guy who paid his dues, but to think of me as the guy who's wrongly accused. Thank you.